Welcome, friends, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite, from the great organization of Blue Door. You want to check out the work that we're doing at Blue Door because we're always doing lots of different things. I mean, we got a lot of challenges ahead of us in this housing and homelessness crisis, and we're trying a lot of different things to end that crisis, prevent people from experiencing homelessness, get incomes to rise, etc. I work with a team of extraordinary people, and they do some great things. Check us out at bluedoor.ca. Hey, listen, we got a great podcast today. The stories of people experiencing homelessness are not told enough. And I think sometimes, we talk about language mattering. And when people say, well, that's a homeless person, we say it's a person experiencing homelessness, not to wordsmith, but so you see the person first. These are family members. These are artists. These are people with talents and people that can give love and receive love. They are a person first. And we want people to see that. And today we talked to a filmmaker, Alex um, Sheremet, and him and his friend Joel Parrish. They knew a brilliant poet, Bruce Ario, who sadly passed away in 2022. And Bruce, they wanted to get his poetry and his story out there into the world. Bruce had through mental health challenges and other challenges that experienced homelessness, and through his poetry, talked about those experiences. He shares, Alex shares one of those poems with us where you could feel that, when he kind of says, it's like I'm like a pastor in a pit, and I'm ruining this poem, but he's saying it's like it being thrown out of a car, like a pit being thrown out of a car, like that part of a fruit that no one wants, that you're just tossed away like you're nothing, but yet that pit can become a seed that can grow something beautiful, right? And so his poetry is so deep, and the story needed to be told of this, and it's really also about Alex and Joe saying that this could bring hope to others that might be going through something, and other artists that might be down and experiencing homelessness and want to push through. And so they put together their talents, and they actually put literally their money into this as first time filmmakers. Made a film about Bruce Ario's life that they're going to take on the film circuit and get out there. It's exciting, and hats off to them for getting the stories out that matter. We have a wonderful conversation. He does a much better job dissecting Bruce's poem that he raised to us than I did. Apologies already for that. And we talk about why this story, why Bruce. We talk a little bit about Bruce's life, what led Alex down this road to do this, him and Joe, and their hopes for the future and this film moving forward, and how you can support it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. These stories matter. Let's go to this conversation now. Alex, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Um, I am so excited to chat with you and hear more about what you've been up to in the film, and how you got into it. But before we get into all that, we ask every guest the same question because it's very personal to people, and that is, what does home mean to you?
I think of home as a base of operations, right? A foundation upon which you actually kind of build your world upwards. And I think hopefully within my lifetime, we get to the point where we could get over all the boring questions of universal housing because everybody deserves a home. And I think that's the least interesting part of the discussion. My interest is once we all get to the point where everybody's housed, what do we do then? How do people then use that home as a base of operations? How do you build your own little mini empire out of just your own room, right? I often thought of that when I was in high school in my own room. I think of it now. I have this basement as an office, and hopefully at some point everybody could get past the boring question of universality and just start answering, now that we have all these goods, what do we do with them? And again, hopefully within my lifetime, that's a possibility.
Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? And it is very possible. It's, certain things have to happen, some dollars, some political will, um, and all of us as citizens really just have to push harder, right, to make that happen. We always want to learn more about our guests. If you'd be so kind as to tell us a little bit about your journey, kind of what brought you to this moment now.
So I was born in Belarus, then the USSR, and I moved to New York City as a child. And I've been living mostly in New York City since that time. I eventually got interested in the arts. And it was one of those things where just little by little, I started noticing that all the things that I thought maybe I couldn't do, I was able to do it, right? It's just fears talking, trying to prevent you from doing difficult tasks. And I remember like early on just thinking, you know what? Yeah, I'm interested in poetry. I write poetry. I'm interested in novels, but I'm probably never going to get to the point where I'm writing about film or really watching film because it's just too much to deal with. There's so many elements in my life. And within a few years, I had a big book of film criticism after having that very thought. And now I am working on my first film, and I'm in many respects totally untrained. Me and my colleague Joel Parrish, he's a photographer and I guess now videographer, and we just sort of came together, combined our various skills to make a film for the first time. And it's an interesting kind of question because we're dealing with limited equipment, we're dealing with just being amateurs here, but still having a blueprint about the arts and knowing how the arts work, it makes it totally doable, right? You could certainly get beyond any kind of equipment limitations as long as you have the right idea in mind. Anything that looks amateurish, you could turn it around and make it very much part and parcel of the thing that you're constructing. So those have been the experiences thus far.
Very cool. Now, would you actually call yourself a filmmaker now?
I guess I have to, right?
Have to, eh?
Because when it comes to the arts, right, Dan Schneider, who's the literary executor of Bruce Ario, uh, he often said that art is best thought of as a verb, right? You either do it or you don't. It's not simply a thing that gets created, it's also the act of creation. If I'm going to be perpetually writing, or if I'm going to be making these films and now have films as sort of planned in the future, I kind of have no choice. And I think if I tell myself, no, I'm not that, that's just another kind of like self talk, self sabotage to keep you from doing something that's difficult, right? This is a whole new set of skills that I have to learn because I started with everything as an author, right? To me, the best part of being a writer is you have the idea in your head, and all you have to do is get up and sit down and just get it on the page somehow. Whereas with a film, there's a lot more to it, right? There's other people involved, new set of skills. But I feel like if no one else is going to do a film about this particular kind of subject, I have to do it instead of just waiting, right? There's no point in waiting around for others.
And that's a great segue. Let's talk about the subject, Bruce Ario. Uh, he's the subject of the film that you and Joe Parrish made. How did this all come about? How do you know Bruce? Like, how did you meet Bruce, and how did that come about? How did you go about now making a film about his life?
So, so Bruce is a literary executor, Dan Schneider. He has a website, cosmoetica.com. And when I was a teenager in high school and researching poetry, for a while, if you were ever doing any kind of poetry research, you would always come across this website. So eventually I was in contact with Dan Schneider, and Dan Schneider knew Bruce Ario back when they were both living in Minneapolis in the 1990s. And he was a poet then. He would run a poetry workshop, and Bruce would attend. And he quickly recognized Bruce as an immensely talented poet. And we all eventually came in contact that way. I now have my own literary website that is automachination.com, and my YouTube channel is also called Automachination. And Bruce actually wrote for the website. He contributed several articles before he unfortunately and unexpectedly passed away in August of 2022. So I'm not going to sit here and say that I was very close to him. I knew him in that way. I knew him as a poetic colleague. Sometimes we would send some emails back and forth. He would appear in some shows with me, and he would contribute some articles. And I wish I had the opportunity to really get to know him while he was around.
And so, why do a film about? He's a poet. I know that we call what we call in the show a lived expert. He spent some time on the streets, experiencing homelessness, um, and pushed through. Uh, why did you guys choose to do a film about Bruce?
Well, the overwhelming reason is besides his life story, which we're going to get into, he is an immensely talented artist, right? To me, this is the number one thing that I want to put out there because if there is a person like Bruce Ario that existed, right? Somebody that had a perfectly normal upbringing in childhood and a loving family, suddenly had a traumatic brain injury in his 20s, had to deal with serious mental health issues such as schizophrenia, had to deal with homelessness and substance abuse. Somebody that went through all of this and then eventually recognized that, you know what, everybody that has mental ills, we all hear, to some extent or another. We might hear voices, for example, but these voices, he would often say, they're trying to sabotage me. I have to act in a way that is rational to my objective self-interest. And he would identify that with the arts, right? I have to always get better and better and better in the arts because if you're in a situation such as homelessness or such as schizophrenia and you feel unmoored from the world, you really do need a substantive kind of objectivity that's out there that you can always test yourself against, that you know exists. And one thing that I like to push, and what Bruce pushed, is there is a getting better at when it comes to craft and the arts. And he really did push through to the other side. It's not just, a feel good story about a man who got better and released some books. He is somebody that is very much at some of the highest levels of accomplishment. And if there are people out there that are listening that maybe were homeless or maybe are kind of like on the edge or might be or dealing with substance abuse or other kinds of health issues, I want Bruce Ario to be an example of something to strive for, right? Like, why can't you be like Bruce Ario? Bruce Ario had these experiences. Why can't you do that for yourself? And of course, this is very separate from uh, wider macro questions of what the state ought to do to put these kinds of conditions in place. But at the end of it, everybody is essentially alone, right? Whether or not you have friends, family, whoever, you are essentially always dealing with yourself, your own struggle, and you have to always be the best that you can be. And I think Bruce exemplifies that for all of his lacks that he experienced in his life. He was able to really build something that mattered.
And I thank you for that. What I really like too is that when people understand, quite often around homelessness, we get asked the question, or people get asked, uh, why do people experience homelessness, right? And for Bruce, you talked about some of the mental health and trauma pieces that that he was working through that led to that, right? So understanding that. Uh, people who are working through some hardcore mental health challenges and don't have the supports in place, it can be very, very challenging. And on the flip side of that, when you have the supports in place, and if you can immerse yourself in the arts and do different things, there is a path forward. You put together this film. Tell me a little bit about the film. Uh, the whole process. You said this is the first time you were doing this. You dove in. What was the process? Did you guys? How long did it take? What did you learn? Were there any surprises along the way? Are you happy with how it's turned out?
So soon after Bruce Ario died in 2022, his literary executor, who himself is a poet, he reconstructed several of Bruce's books. So, for example, he received a bunch of papers from Bruce's family, manuscripts, poems, some materials that we had never seen before. And he went through all of Bruce's poems and he put together a selected poems. He put together another poetry collection. And he also reconstructed what we think of as the original, unedited, legendary version of his novel City Boy about growing up in Minneapolis and dealing with some of these experiences. And there was this whole big thing that happened eventually where Bruce submitted this book to various editors and they really chopped it up. They really cut it up. They really made it much more palatable. The thing that's wonderful about City Boy is that it is a perfect glimpse into a fractured mind. It's not one of those fractured glimpses where like sometimes people want to like ape the experience of maybe homelessness or mental ills by, I don't know, writing a paragraph or a page of prose where everything is just disconnected and words are just floating in and out randomly. And I've never, experienced mental health issues, but it's probably not quite like that. It's probably closer to how Bruce describes it, which is you start seeing things that make sense, and then suddenly he sort of imperceptibly goes off the deep end as the narrator in the book. For instance, every time that he starts talking about love in City Boy, if the word appears too often on a page, something bad is going to happen. And this is not only a nice kind of glimpse into this sort of experience, but also going back to the idea of craft and becoming, good at the arts. It's a really nice inversion of classic coming of age novels. Usually when boys talk about love, when they talk about the city they're growing up in, there's a kind of romance attached, but there it was a kind of fracture. So when all these books were put together, I told Dan, listen, before releasing these books, I really do think we do have the resources. We should make some sort of film about Bruce. So once I had that thought, I contacted my colleague, and I just knew right away that he would just agree to do it. Not being a filmmaker himself, it doesn't matter, right? We're going to split the costs. We're going to do everything ourselves because we want to get the story out there. And we contacted Bruce's church, for example, his family, got a lot of materials from different people, set up interviews in Minneapolis with people that knew him, went to Minneapolis to capture tons of footage of the city to add to the kind of ambience in the film, right? Because Bruce was very big on the city of Minneapolis. He was very big on the idea that this is where he grew up. But at the same time, there's a very much like a strong social element to that as well. So as the film develops, we try to do this thing where, on the one hand, we want to be respectful to the social and pro-social elements of Bruce's life, but also the fact that he was very inward, right? It is a lonely process to write. It is literally you against you, and it's nobody else. So the film essentially came about from necessity. If nobody was going to do it, we have to do it. If time passes and fewer people know Bruce, and maybe people forget about him, that would be a problem, right? So as soon as it happened, the plans started formulating to get this done.
Let me ask you a question around if Bruce saw this movie, do you think he'd like it? What do you think he would say to you?
I think he'd like it. He would also be very surprised in the sense that um, he did in different times recognize his talent, but he also had issues with sometimes wanting to please people too much, wanting to be a little too ingratiating. For instance, the whole reason why his novel, which was a great novel in its first instantiation, was cut up was because he wasn't necessarily very comfortable with what he produced. He wasn't necessarily always very confident. So I think he would be shocked that it's happening, but I would say that don't even take it as a compliment. Take it as a cause and effect. If you in fact do something worthwhile, this thing should be done for you and about you, right? It's not merely somebody being nice to him. It's not merely because I was friendly with them. It's really just an issue of just deserts, right? He's a deserving person.
Did you learn anything new as as a filmmaker, you're going through the process, you're talking with a lot of people doing research? Were there surprises that came through putting together the film?
Well, some things were a little bit easier to start with simply because I've had a YouTube channel for a few years now and I conduct interviews on various topics. So I already got used to talking to people, asking questions, that sort of thing. So when it came down to like sit down and do the interviews, we did luck out in the sense that we had three perfect characters who sat down with us to like discuss Bruce's life work in the city. But also, I do think I was able to sort of pull some of that out. Having a YouTube channel, like I was doing some, audio engineering type stuff, but uh, the differences kind of end there because once you start doing the movie, and if you're a perfectionist like me, everything is now like every single second. Like sometimes I could be sitting for several days working on 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of footage and just getting it together. And then still, it's like, well, now there's the audio engineering part. Now I have to make sure to listen to it on 3 different computers, on a TV, headphones, no headphones, this kind of speaker, a phone, whatever it might be. So it's a ton of like little details, but at the same time, it is kind of shocking that uh, a film like this could be made just with 2 people, right? We are sort of combining our forces, and we're trying to make it as best as possible with just 2 people that we're not necessarily trained in this, but are willing to learn as we go. And I know that next year when we collect footage for another film on another poet, it's going to be a lot more streamlined in terms of all the kind of practical ramifications of sharing data. Like we have like terabytes of footage, for instance. It's a lot of stuff that has to be moved back and forth, sent back and forth. The ins and outs of various software that we're using. So it's going to be more streamlined, and things are going to go a bit quicker. But I'm not at all dissatisfied with the process. I don't think that I'm not the kind of person that's going to leave any flagrant flaws, like, oh yeah, you could tell this is the first. I don't want people thinking that, right? I'm not willing to leave these kinds of obvious flaws, right? Anything that maybe looks a little bit like a flaw, I'm going to work into as part of the meta story so that it doesn't come off in that way, right? Which is the other angle to it. There's limitations for anything that one might do, but definitely there's always a way to turn limitations into advantages.
Absolutely. And listen, some of the best films have been made with even Hollywood films that with shoestring budgets. And I remember hearing a story about Dallas Buyers Club that everyone's saying is so gritty and dark, and it's because they couldn't really afford lighting, so they worked with it to their advantage. What are your hopes for this coming out as the film is complete? What are your hopes moving forward? What do you want to happen with this film and with Bruce's story?
Well, I plan on sending it around to film festivals. Hopefully, we could get it on a streaming service at some point that would typically like artsy films, films about artists, films that sort of are really out of the ordinary. I want there to be a DVD release with tons of extras, because just like the interviews alone, they are compelling in and of themselves, but they run altogether something like 3 hours. We can't do 3 hours of interviews in something like a 75 to a 90-minute film. We knew that from the beginning, but I want to get back to the golden age of DVDs where you would buy something for the extras and it's like, wow, you're getting a ton of extras, right? You're getting a lot of work being put in, out of respect for the audience. And I want there to be like a wider knowledge of who Bruce was. I think he could definitely become a classic American poet. He very much has some of that Emily Dickinson feel to the poetry, in the sense that it tends to be pretty short. It's most of his poems are in Ario form. It's a name. It's a form that was named by his literary executor after Bruce Ario, because he started getting a lot of poems from Bruce that were essentially title, 3 lines, 3 lines, 3 lines, and then an end line that has a kind of like a twist of some sort. In the same way that a sonnet is split up typically between 8 and 6 lines, and after the eighth line, there is some sort of turn, some sort of new way of glimpsing things, some kind of inversion, maybe even of the very argument the poet was making up until that point. So Bruce often does these crazy end lines that seem to come out of nowhere. And really, it's the sort of thing where you don't have to be like a very big, deep reader of poetry. It's not like you're being asked to start with John Donne or Wallace Stevens or Hart Crane or other really difficult poets. He's universally accessible. The poems are short, and I think most people immediately will start to understand what's going on. But if you are a connoisseur of poetry, you will notice so many layers, so many items that you could go through and geek out on as a connoisseur. So it really is for everybody. He really is an everyman in that regard, both his story as well as the actual execution of the poems.
It's interesting. Quite often on this podcast, we talk about how language matters. We when people say that's a homeless person, we say a person experiencing homelessness, because we need you to see the person first. And although experiencing homelessness definitely was evident in Bruce's writing, or in his poems, right, that affected him, gave him something to talk about. It wasn't who he was. He is, at his core, was a brilliant artist, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and this is exactly what he wanted to do for himself. Like he was always very like, for instance, like I did an interview with him once, and as soon as it was over, he sent me an email. He was like, "I want you to put this paragraph somewhere in the video so that people don't think that I am in any way romanticizing anything like homelessness or mental illness." And he was very adamant about understanding these things as these are these are obstacles that you face. They're not identity issues. And the reason why you're facing these obstacles is there's only one purpose, right? Which is there is something inside of you that can really grow, that can really end up with something worthwhile, right? You could do everything that you need to get done, right? Once you get over the obstacles, right? So he was very much art first, and this is the way that we want to view him and present him, right? It's not just a nice story of success. It is actually accomplishment at some of the highest levels of human achievement.
That's beautiful. Now, listen, I'd be remiss. We've talked about Bruce. We've talked about you've at length about how talented he was. Would you be willing to share one of your favorites of his poems?
Yeah, and as I do these different shows, I'm going to try to share different poems on each show. So here's something that I don't think I've shared elsewhere. So this is a poem titled Apparent Scope, and it has something to do with not only homelessness, but also, I guess, mental ills and things that are perhaps even more universal, right? You'll notice in some of the language, even when it gets a little specific, you know that it could be universalized elsewhere. And this is also in that Ario form. So again, it's three lines, three lines, three lines, and then a final kind of twist that makes you see things anew. Apparent scope. My life sashayed into a train running far faster than legal limits. I was thrown out of the passenger seat like a pit. There I met dogs, thieves, and victims, occasionally with light in their lives, a place to rendezvous and start up for a match I could only sense. I couldn't hardly rise to take my seat among the others who didn't know where I was or where I was going to. And just to like break apart a little bit of what's going on, I mean, just look at some of these lines. I was thrown out of the passenger seat like a pit. You know, it's like a pit of what? What exactly is the image here? And you don't even need to know what kind it is. You just know that it's something that is just detritus, right? To get back to the idea of either mentally ill or homeless people being ignored or being invisible, you might as well just be a pit, right? You might as well be the unwanted part of the fruit, but we know that a pit could very well be, you know, blossoming into a tree, right? There are met dogs, thieves, and victims, and then very important, occasionally with light in their lives, right? He's not trying to say that all these people are wonderful. He's not trying to say that you know, even necessarily everybody has the same kind of potential that he might have. He's trying to be realistic in appraising his situation as a victim at some point, right? For a place to rendezvous and start up for a match I could only sense. He knows there's a way out. He knows there's something that he could do for himself if he could just find that match and understand where he's going. And then this very mysterious line, I couldn't hardly rise to take my seat. You know, what is that? These double negatives, right? I couldn't hardly rise to take my seat among the others who didn't know where I was or where I was going to.
Uh, Powerful stuff, and I love that when you talk about that pit, and one part of the fruit that's also a seed that could grow something wonderful, right? Fantastic. So, tell me, if someone wants to see this film, if someone wants to check it out, support, see the work, are there places they can go? Are you on social media? Where can they support?
I am on social media. My social media is just my name, Alex Sheremet, at Twitter. My website, my literary website, which houses Bruce's stuff, as well as you'll see information about the film. That's Automachination. That's AUTOMACH Chination. I now think I should have named it something different, because every time that I tell people automachination, it's like, wow, it's a word that Alex made up, and now he has to repeat it. Nobody knows how to spell it. Nobody knows what it means, but we're gonna keep it, right. So my YouTube channel also automachination. As the film is getting closer to a release, either through DVDs or film festivals, all of that is going to be updated. There's also still a GoFundMe. If you check out the title of the film, right, Bruce Ario, From There to There, Bruce Ario, the Minneapolis poet, you'll find a GoFundMe with all the information. We have a GoFundMe because, again, whether or not this film makes money is kind of immaterial. We're just putting our money down on the line to get an important story out. Whatever happens, happens. But in the meantime, people have been generously donating to us to get this thing out there. And also on my Patreon, that's also at Automachination, we have an 8-minute a teaser, and we also have a 37-minute teaser as well for the film, a rough cut of the first and 27 minutes respectively.
Very, very cool. And I hope people check that out. I hope they support. I can't wait. I want to be surprised one day to flip on Netflix and see that this is an option. And I'm sure it's going to be in all sorts of different film festivals and gain traction. Alex, thank you for having the courage to tell the stories that matter and to step up into a new medium, and put your own money into something about telling a powerful story that I think will give a lot of people hope. It's so appreciated. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with us today. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Michael, for having me, and thank you for the constructive work that you do.
We'll see you again.